Welcome to iOS Development Tips and Tricks course. My name is Andy. In this lecture, we're going to cover about the auto layout, and we're going to start from the basic one and gradually increase our complexity. So let's create the single view application. And I'm going to call this auto layout project. I'm going to select the folder where I'm going to put this project. So let's open the main storyboard, and we're going to start with something simple. I'm going to get a label from our object library and put it about in the middle. So let's see real quick what's the effect that we have by putting the label about the center of the horizontal of the screen. So I'm going to run this real quick to show you what the effect is. So as you can see, even though we tried to put this label in the center of our scene, it's still showing up not really what we expected. And same thing when we rotate this device, it's not really in the center. So this is the kind of thing that auto layout will be able to help us. So let's go back to our main storyboard. So think of the auto layout as a tools to help you place the object in your scene to be displayed on the same position every time you open the device, regardless what the device size or device type. So let me create a little bit of room here for our storyboard. So we want the label to be horizontally centered. So click on the align icon. First, we're going to set horizontally in the container. And this will give us that the label will be positioned center. But that constraint alone is not enough. So let's say if I move it here, it's still considered be in the center horizontally. So we still miss a constraint. And that constraint is how far from the top that you want to put this label on. So in order to do that, we can do Control, click, and drag to the super view. And we select vertical spacing to top layout guide. And when you do that, the line becomes blue, which means it's conforming with the auto layout. Now, if we run this, we're going to have the label that always in the same position and always in the center. So that's the landscape, and that's the portrait. So even if we switch to a different device, like maybe iPhone 4S, it will still be in the same position. We still get the label horizontally aligned, and the distance from the top to the label is still the same. Now let's give it a name to the label. For example, we call it, this is my label. And as soon as you do that, then the line becomes orange and there is a dotted line. So the dotted line will tell you that's the position where this label will be if you run it on a device. So right now, even though it's not positioned center, but if you run it again, that label will be positioned in the center. So that is what the dotted line trying to tell you. That's going to be the position at runtime. And in order to move this label to the correct position, we can just simply doing the update frames. And now the lines become blue again. Let's bring in more object from the library. Let's say I want to create a button. And I'm going to drag the button below the label. So let's say I want this button to be that wide. And I want the button to be in the center. And now let's do the same thing as what we did to the label. I'm going to do horizontally align. And we got the red line, meaning we're still missing some constraint. And also there is a red arrow. If you click the red arrow, it will tell you that the button is still missing a constraint. Then if you click this red, like a red stop sign, you can have Xcode just add the missing constraint. When you do that, the button now is blue all over. But I want you to understand what's going on here. So I'm going to undo what Xcode just did for us. And now, in order to maintain the height and the width as you expected, we can go to the pin and then select the width. Let's say I want to set the width to 170 and the height to 30. Now the button is showing that there is a -2 because initially the width only 168, but we set it on the constraint that we want it to be 170. Now if we go to the size inspector, we can see that the width is going to be equal 170. But the button in the scene has not been updated yet by Interface Builder. Now let's continue setting up the auto layout for our buttons. So we need to set a certain distance between the button and the label. And in order to do that, we can do Control, click on the button, and drag to the label, and set the vertical spacing. Now if we click the distance between the label and the button, we can see that the constant is 22. We can change this. So let's say I want to change the distance to be 30, and then press enter. Now we're seeing that this distance needs to be 8.5 more. And if we click the buttons, now there is a dotted orange line. So again, we can just do update frame. Now the button is being repositioned and we got everything blue. So if we run this on the device, we're going to see a consistent position between the label and the buttons. Even if we rotate, we're going to see the same thing. So auto layout maintaining that position for us. Now let's bring another object. Let's bring a text field. And I'm going to position about the far left. And I'm going to drag this text field all the way until we see the blue line on the other side. Okay, so now I'm expecting this text field will be stretched out from the left to the right. But without auto layout, if we run this, we may get a different result. So let me make this bigger. As you can see, the text field, it's starting to the position as we see on the scene, but it goes over the device size. So I'm going to click this, and then we're going to go to the pin. If we want to set the text field to be stretched to the left and to the right, so we need to put the constraint to the left and to the right. So right now, it's still not a solid red. So if we click this, it's become a solid red. So that's what we want to do. And I'm going to uncheck this constraint to margin. And now we can see, so the distance between the text field and the device boundary is going to be 20 points. And same thing on the right is going to be 20 points as well. So I'm going to click Add to Constraint. Now we can see there is a blue line. So that's the distance. And it signifies by a 20 on the constant. And the same thing with on the left side is also 20. But why still a red line? Meaning we're still missing constraint. That's because we haven't set where this text field is going to be on the screen. We already set the left and right, but we haven't set the top or bottom. And in order to do that, Control, click and drag to button or to label, or we can also select to the super view. So that's really up to us. If we want to maintain the same position between this text field to the nearest object, then we can go to the button. So we can also go to the bottom of the screen. So let's say now we going to set this against the bottom of our super view. So we can do that and then click drag to the super view and the super view becomes blue. and we release vertical spacing to bottom layout guide. But remember, because we set to the bottom, this position of the text field will be consistent against the bottom of the top view. And if we click this line, we can see that the constant is 422, meaning the distance from the text field to the bottom of super view is going to be a constant about 422. So that means if our device has less than 400, this text field will not be shown at all. So let's run it on the iPhone 4S. And we only see the label and the button because on a landscape mode, the size of the screen is less than 400. So now let's try rotate this device. Now we can see the text field. So the distance from this text field to the bottom is about 422. And because that position is on top of the label, then the label is now gone. It's actually underneath the text field. Let's now build a more complex layout so we can learn more about the auto layout features. So I'm going to remove everything here. Let's say I want to bring an image. Then I'm going to drag to about the center horizontally. And then I want this image to stretch from the left to the right. And then I want this image to be horizontally placed on the screen. I'm going to set the auto layout to be horizontally in container. And then I'm going to set the auto layout for this image. So let's say I want this image to be about 20 from the left and 20 from the right. And I want this image to have the height about, let's say, 180. And then I'm going to add the constraint. So we still have the red lines. I hope you can guess what's going on here. So we already set the right and left for the distance. We also set the height for the image, but we're still missing where we're going to put this image. Is it the center of the screen? Is it about at the top? Or is it about right here? So what we're missing is the distance from the top of super view to the top of the image. So again, I'm going to do Control, click and drag to the super view and select vertical spacing to top layout guide. Now we got the dotted line, and the only thing that we need to do is just update the frames. Now we get all blue for the auto layout, meaning the auto layout is good. And I have an image that I want to bring in, so I'm going to add files real quick. Then I'm going to select this programming.jpg, then click add. Now if we go to this image and go to the attribute inspector, now we can select that image, the programming. And just to make sure the image still proportional, I'm just going to select aspect fill. I'm going to put some background color. So click on the area of your view, and then I'm going to select maybe just this a bit dark red color, right? And then I'm going to build some kind of a form. Let's say this is a training center and people that interested to the training needs to fill out a form. So let's bring in a label. And then I'm going to name this label training registration. Then for now I'm going to move this to the screen, and I'm going to change to the white color. we're going to build a form, a simple form, just like first name and last name and email. And I do not want to create my form with the red background. So I want to have still a white background. So we can do that. So let's bring in a view, call it UI view, and drag to the scene. And I'm going to place the UI view about right there for now. So we have an image, label, and now let's build our form. And I'm going to get a label, put it right there, and then another one, and another one. And the next thing, I want to bring a text field. And don't worry about the layout for now, we're going to fix that. Alright, so that's our form. And I'm going to make this view smaller. And then we need a button. And I'm going to rename this button to submit. And then this first label to first name. Second one to last name. And the last one to email. Right now, let's rearrange this a bit. And move this first name label to inside our view. So now let's set up some auto layout. Actually, probably this color will not be a good idea, because if we have a dotted orange color, then we cannot see that. So I'm going to change this to a more light color. Let's just use the light blue. Right, so we need to change this back to a more darker color then, to maybe dark gray. Alright, now let's work on the auto layout. So I'm going to make some room by closing the document outline. So we already set the auto layout for our image. So everything good for our image. So the next one is the label. So let's say I want to set the distance between the image and the label to be about 25. And between the label and the super view, I want to set it to 15. So 25 and 15. So let's click on the label and go to the pin. And I'm going to set the top to be 25. And I want the left side to the super view to be 15. And then click Add to Constraints. Now we got the orange dotted line. So we just need to do Update Frame. So we're set with our label. Now let's work on the subview. And for the subview, I want the distance to be about, let's say 40, 40, and then the distance to the label about 15. So click on the subview and then go to the pin and highlight the left, top, and right. And for the left, I'm going to set it to 40. The top is going to be 15. And the right side is going to be 40 as well. So we set the left, top, and right, but we're still missing one more constraint, which is the height. So I'm going to set the height. I'm going to set it to 180. And then add for constraint. Now again, we got the dotted orange line, which is good news. Now we got the subview set. Next, we need to work on the object inside the subview. So let's work on the first name. So let's say I want to just follow the suggestion by the blue line. So as we drag this first name, there is a blue line. That's what Xcode suggests to us. So I'm going to set the blue line until it's showing up at the top and also showing up on the left side. And then I'm just going to control click and drag until the subview is highlighted and release. And we're going to select leading space to container. And then we're going to do control click again. Now we're going to drag to the top until the subview is highlighted and select top space to container. Now we got AutoLayout set up for the first name. Let's work on the first text field. Then I'm going to make sure that this text field vertically align with the first name. So in order to do that, control click on the text field and drag until the first name is highlighted and release. And we're going to select multiple constraint here. So on your keyboard, press the command key. And while you're pressing the command key, select the horizontal spacing and also select center vertically. And then we can click the add constraint. So what just happened is when we check the center vertically, meaning the center of this text field is going to be the same with the center of the first name. And we also set the horizontally, which is this small blue line, meaning the distance between the first name and the text field. Now you can see that we have the orange dotted line. So if we do update frame at the moment, our text field is going to be only that long. So we don't want that. I want the text field to stretch from about here all the way to the subview. So let's do that. So click and drag all the way to the subview until we see the guided blue line. Now if we click again on the text field, it's still showing the orange dotted line. That's because we haven't set the auto layout for the right side of this text field. So let's do that real quick. So control, click, and drag until the subview is highlighted and release. Now we're going to select trailing space to container. Now we get all the blue line for the text field, and this is guarantee that the text field will start about from the first name, about this distance, small distance from the first name, all the way to the end of the subview. So now let's work on the second label, and I want the distance between first name and last name, maybe about, let's try with 40. And I want the beginning of the letter to be the same. So in order to do that, instead of dragging this last name to the super view, we're going to drag this last name to the first name. And we're going to select leading, which means the second label will follow the start position of the first label. Now we need to set the auto layout for the distance. And I'm going to go to the pin and highlight this. So let's say we set it to 30 instead of 40. And then click add one constraint. Now we got the dotted orange line. And then we just need to do update frame. So I think the distance is a bit too big. So click on this blue line, and I'm going to set the distance to be just 20. And the auto layout will automatically reposition the second label for us. And now I want to set the second text field. I'm going to drag this all the way. And similar to what we did on the first name, control, click and drag to the last name, and press the command key and select horizontal and center vertically, and add constraint. And similar thing, do control, click to the super view and select trailing. And let's do now for the email. Similar thing to what we did between the second label and first label. So control, click to the last name, press the command key and select vertical spacing and leading, and then add constraint. Now we want to set the spacing to be the same. So between last name and first name, we set it to 20. And we're going to do the same between last name and email. So click that line and set it to 20. Now we're going to set the text field. So when we set the text field for the last name and first name, we got a bit lucky that the length of the first name and last name is about the same. That's why this text field seems to be aligned just fine. But with the email, we cannot set the horizontal distance between the email and the text field and expect that this line is going to be the same, because if we, for example, like move the text field a bit to the left or a bit to the right, then it will not be lined up. So in order to do that, we're going to do the same thing what we did with the label. Control click from the text field to the text field above it, and then select leading. And then we're going to select the text field to the email, center vertically, and then we're going to drag this all the way and do the distance to the super view with trailing. So hopefully you start getting the idea how the auto layout works here. So for the submit, I want to be exactly the same, the starting position between the submit and the text field. So we can simply do click and drag from the submit to the text field, and we're going to press Command key, vertical spacing and leading, and then add constraint. Now we got everything blue, so let's test this in the device. So I'm going to build and run this. And looks like we got some issue with our image here. So let's check real quick our image. So back to the main storyboard. We're missing the clip subviews. So if I open this image is so big that it has the width and the height that will extend the device size. So in order to maintain what we already set here, that we only want to see the image, the height is about 180. So we want to maintain that height. So we need to do a clip subviews. So now let's run it again. Now the size of the image is maintained at 180. So the image is basically about, I would say, less than a half of the screen. But since we set a hard number to be 180 for this image, when we rotate this device, we might see something that unexpected. So our form field is getting cut off because the image now even expand more than half of the screen. So if you want to maintain that the image only have, let's say, about 1/3 of the screen for any device orientation, we need to set a ratio instead of a hard number like 180. But before we do that, let's test this real quick on bigger devices. So on bigger devices like iPhone 6s, the perception is this image is smaller than the iPhone 4s. So if you want to maintain this image to be always 1/3 the size of the screen, we can do that. So let's go back to our main storyboard. So I'm going to remove this 180 and then click delete. Then now we're going to set this image to only about 1/3 the screen size. So click the image and then control and select to the super view and then select equal heights. Now let's open the size inspector, and we have the equal heights to super view, and then select edit. And on the multiplier, because we only want the image heights to be 1/3 of the screen, I'm going to put a ratio 1 to 3. Meaning this image is going to be only 1/3 of the screen size. So if you want to make the image half of the screen size, then we can put 1/2, but right now I want to set it 1/3. You can also put decimal value on here, like 1333, meaning about 1/3 of the screens, but I'm going to use a ratio approach, and then press enter, and we got the orange dotted line. So we just need to do update frame. So click somewhere else first, and then click the image again. And then we need to readjust the position of the other label. So every element now needs to be repositioned. But because we set the form inside of a subview, the auto layout for this form and the button text field is not being affected. So we only need to update the position of our subview. So first, let's do the label, and then update frame, and then the subview, update frame. Now let's test and run this again. So right now, the image is guaranteed to be about 1/3 of the screen. So it doesn't matter whether the orientation is landscape or portrait, it's guaranteed to be always 1/3 of the screen. So even if we try on different devices, like let's say iPhone 5, and then run it, it's still about 1/3 the size of the screen. The 1/3 is starting from the top, and about 1/3 the size of the screen height. So if we rotate, it's still about 1/3. And I'm going to test this real quick on an iPad, so we can see the impact that we did on the image. So we're using iPad Air. And again, the size of the image still 1/3 of the screen height. And if we rotate, we get the same effect. So that's how auto layout working on different devices and different orientation. So we maintain the same position of the element that we set on our storyboard. And to address the issue that we saw earlier on smaller device where the form getting cut off, so let me bring that up again on iPhone 5. So as you can see on the portrait orientation, the form is okay, not getting cut off. But if we rotate this device, the form is cut off. So we're going to address this issue on the next lecture. And additionally, if you want to know more detail about how to set up the display proportionately, just what we did on the image view here, you can check the lecture on divide the scene to exactly half and divide the scene to 3 exact view to be proportionate to the device size.